Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. Really fun stuff on today's show. Interesting data being shared by ESPN. A lot of this favors Georgia. We, of course, like that. Some stuff from Kirby Smart here, both in terms of where he sees the SEC going and perhaps something that Kirby Smart's not willing to do for the upcoming season. We've got a little bit of show controversy here today, a little internal fighting amongst our DawgNation Daily family. We'll see if we can kind of make some sense out of that here today. And to kick things off in just a moment, I'm going to do something that's almost certainly not going to work, but we're going to do it anyway because sometimes that's just the way that it goes. So we're going to do that here off the top of the program. We're glad to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Against my better judgment, I'm going to try something today that almost certainly is not going to work. It is doomed to fail, and yet I still, because maybe I'm stubborn or hard-headed or something along those lines, I'm going to do it anyway just because I sort of feel like I need to. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to set this up here over the course of a few minutes. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of argue against a point that Kirby Smart has made. And this is a very, very bad idea for two important reasons. Reason number one is, in sort of a battle of wits between me and Kirby Smart of, well, y'all just like Kirby better, of course you're going to take his side, and you probably should. So it sort of sets me up to be unpopular with my own audience, which is never a great idea. Plus, given the track record for success that Kirby Smart has, well, obviously he's more likely to be right than me anyway. And so, therefore, that's another reason why this is perhaps doomed to fail. And yet, still, I'm going to do this anyway. So here we go, and you can judge how well we do this over the course of the next few minutes. Let me start with this. Let me set this up this way. So I was looking at, I guess it was yesterday it came out, last couple of days it's come out. ESPN has released its Football Power Index preseason data. They call this the FPI. Now, they also have the SP+. This is another analytics rating thing, kind of fancy math, fancy statistics, and everything sort of tells the same story right now. Georgia at number one in all of these analytics ratings and things like that. So there you go. No real surprise there. The calculators and the computers sort of saying the same thing we expect the human polls to say later on this summer, that Georgia starts the year as the number one team in the country. So you kind of deal with that and you sort of move on to what's next. And here's where I think things get kind of interesting, is that ESPN wrote a story about its own data, kind of looking at all kinds of different angles about what their Football Power Index preseason ratings, kind of show. And they were kind of creating some narratives and some storylines about some of the stuff that's there. And one of the things that I saw, a guy named Neil Payne, right, for ESPN.com, kind of stopped me in my tracks by how wrong that I think that it is. And it's the kind of thing that we're sort of seeing a lot of as of late. And I think that if you're a Georgia fan or sort of an SEC guy or just someone who cares about like objective truth to the extent that that exists, I think noticing this and sort of pointing out the fallacy of it is probably a pretty important thing to do. So let me throw this on the screen here for a moment. I want to read this to you, and I want to explain to you why I think that we're seeing something that's very, very wrong start to take shape. So kind of a long article at ESPN, some key takeaways from their sort of data, they call the Football Power Index, or FPI. There's the subhead that says, two conference domination in college sports. You got, according to ESPN, two conferences that are well ahead of the rest of college football when it comes to the upcoming season. Now, on the one hand, that's sort of true because according to ESPN Analytics, you've got the SEC with a 52.5% chance of winning the national title for this upcoming season, and you've got the Big Ten with a 32.3% chance of winning the national title in this upcoming season. After that, the ACC is next with only a 6% chance. And you got the independents, which would obviously include Notre Dame, at 5.1%. And then the Big 12, kind of a new-look conference for this year, they come in last at 3.6%. So what the ESPN writer is saying here is, Well, you've got the SEC and the Big Ten that are so far removed from the rest of the conferences. And in a roundabout way, that's kind of true. The Big Ten is well ahead of the ACC, 32.3 compared to 6% in terms of its percent chance of winning the national championship. But here is where I think this gets really, really wrong really, really fast. The gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is not quite as wide as the gap between the Big Ten and the ACC, but it's fairly close. And this idea that we hear this, and we've heard this for the entirety of the calendar year because of all of the changes that are going on and the differentiation that exists between the SEC and the Big Ten from a revenue standpoint compared to the rest of college football. It's always Big Ten, SEC in the same sentence. Big Ten, SEC, Big Ten, SEC. But what situations like this sort of fail to recognize is, listen, the Big Ten and the SEC are not equals. Now, they are similar in the fact that they're both well ahead of leagues like the ACC and the Big 12 and whatever's left of the rest of college football. But when it comes to competitive balance on the field, the SEC and the Big Ten are not the same, no matter how much anybody tries to make them be the same. And the percentage chance of winning the national championship sort of proved that. According to ESPN's own math nerds, the SEC has more than half of a chance, 52.5% chance of winning the national title. In my mind, that is a huge gap, sort of a huge chasm here, a huge gap between it and the Big Ten that, according to those same calculators, only has a 32.3% chance of winning the national championship. But somehow it seems like the SEC and the Big Ten occasionally get treated, and frequently now get treated, as equals. And if that doesn't sort of tell the story for you in terms of the difference that exists between the SEC and the Big Ten, something else that was also found in the ESPN Football Power Index data, I think makes it even more clear. When you look at the individual ratings for all the teams, you can see, well, who's rated where, and then you see who's playing a large number of these highly rated teams, and that's how ESPN, on the basis of FPI, sort of creates its strength of schedule. And when you look at, and we'll show you this on the screen here too, when you look at the strength of schedule as produced by the ESPN Football Power Index, you see something remarkable here, which to me tells you the story of why ultimately the SEC and the Big Ten are not similar leagues and should not be treated as equals, no matter how far they both are ahead of the rest of college football. These two leagues are still not equal and should not be treated that way. According to the ESPN Football Power Index, this is amazing. The top 9 teams in America, according to strength of schedule for the upcoming season, are all in the SEC. Florida, no surprise, playing the toughest schedule. We've said that before. After that, it's Mississippi State. After that, it's Georgia, interestingly enough. More on them in a moment, of course. Then it's Kentucky, then Auburn, then Alabama, then Oklahoma, then Tennessee. By the way, shout out to Georgia Tech, the first non-SEC team in the ranking of strength of schedule, according to the ESPN Football Power Index. Yellow Jackets coming at number 10, but ahead of them, 9 teams, all in the SEC. This is why we should not have to hear it mentioned that, oh, it's the SEC and the Big Ten, the two leagues that are the same, the two leagues that are way better than everybody else. Both those leagues may be way better than the rest of America, but those leagues are not equal to each other. Strength of schedule certainly proves that. As you saw there a moment ago, you got to go all the way down to, 11, 12, I guess it's 12 in America to find the toughest schedule for a Big Ten team. That's actually Purdue. Then you get into some of the other leagues' top teams. But this is well after you've got like 10 other SEC teams in terms of the strength of schedule before you even get to the toughest schedule for a team there in the Big Ten. So this is a false narrative right now. And it's being pushed by more than just ESPN. It's not like a conspiracy theory. It's just a talking point that's emerged that I believe is incorrect, and it ought to be pushed back on. That people seem to want to treat the Big Ten as an equal league to the SEC, but the data produced by ESPN right there alone suggests that's just simply not true. In fact, it's obviously untrue. The SEC is still far better on the field than the Big Ten, no matter what the revenue for the two leagues sort of looks like here right now. And this also kind of dovetails back to something that we talked about in January, that the future of college football, for better or worse, is going to be conversations sort of like this, that you've got to be comfortable in the future arguing, because all of a sudden now we've gone from having 4 teams in the playoff, now we have 12. And perhaps conventional wisdom says, well, that ought to take some of the the arguing out of college football because now more teams make the playoff. But you've now got like these sort of three differentiators of, who makes the playoff, right? It's the argument between, like, say, number 12 and number 13 as to who actually gets into the playoff. It's the argument between number 4 and number 5 as to who earns a bye. It's the argument between number 8 and number 9 in terms of the seeding of who gets the home game and who has to go on the road. That actually there's even more arguing going to take place in college football in the future. And this, stuff coming out from ESPN, the idea that to begin the year, the SEC and the Big Ten are just equal leagues, both way better than everybody else. That's the kind of arguments that ought to be pushed back, and they ought to be pushed back before the season even begins, which is obviously what we're trying to do here right now. And this also kind of brings me back to the point that I was making to begin the show. This is where I think I sort of find myself at odds with Kirby Smart a little bit, as strange as that is to say, because Kirby Smart does not seem to be down with that very much. And we kind of told you back in January when it came to, or I should say this would have been in December, when Georgia lost the SEC championship to Alabama. We thought the argument was fairly convincing for Georgia to still make the playoff, even though it lost one game by a field goal to Alabama at the time. Kirby Smart wasn't all that much into doing that. He sort of said a few words about it, but he didn't push it very hard. And to be frank, we thought that Kirby Smart should have pushed that a little harder than he did. And in the future, arguing on behalf of your team is something that's going to need to happen in college football. But Kirby Smart still sort of feels like that kind of behavior is a little bit beneath him because he expects to win games on the field. And obviously, on the one hand, I understand where he's coming from on that. Of course, if you take care of your own business, you don't have anything to worry about. But there are going to be losses to be had in future seasons. Georgia may not lose a game in the upcoming season, but in some season and sometime in the future, there are going to be some losses, and how you compare teams that have losses is going to become really important. And the only way to decide that is sort of arguing it out, and that's something that Georgia's going to have to be ready to do. Now, last week when this came up at the SEC media, the spring meeting event there in Destin, Florida, Kirby Smart was sort of asked about, not making the playoff and not being one of the 4 best teams. And, he kind of sort of shared his thought on this. A lot of you, and I don't deny this, I don't deny this at all. A lot of you are going to like what he says on this. And I don't necessarily hate it. I just think that in the future, you got to be more ready to argue the point because of how easy it is to sort of, I guess, incorrectly compare unequal things like ESPN maybe was doing when it comes to the SEC and the Big Ten and the story they wrote about their own football power index stuff. So let me let you hear Kirby Smart last week. As I said before, I sort of wish he would embrace the idea of arguing on his behalf a little bit more forcefully, but Kirby's got a different point of view on that. This is what he said on that topic last week.
Do I think there's going to be teams with multiple losses? Yes. Yeah. In the playoffs. I mean, most certainly there is. How do you differentiate? I'll leave that to, the committees. I mean, I think that's why we have the system we have. I mean, it happened yesterday in baseball. So there's a lot of debate about what teams get in baseball. There's going to be debate about what basketball team got left out. There's going to be debate about what football team get left out. And ultimately, everybody has a chance to go out on the grass and perform and play and earn the right to be in. And somebody's going to get left out that probably shouldn't. And, I don't get into I try to control what I can control because I can't control what a committee or what someone votes or thinks should be in. And we've had that with the 14 playoff. There's been probably 3 times that I thought we were one of the best 4 teams, but we didn't earn it on the field. And so the same opportunity is going to present itself. It's just going to be 13, 14, 15, and you guys are going to debate a lot about it, and I'm going to try to make my team better so they're not 13, 14, 15.
Kirby, were you surprised you didn't get in last year, or did you?
No, not surprised at all.
Just kind of realized you lost that last game. And
yeah, I mean, we had our opportunity on the field, and that's what you can ask for. I'm not going to cry over it. I think we had a good football team.
So listen, obviously what Smart's expressing there is a competitor's mindset. Smart is saying, well, if I win my games, I don't have to worry about, these arguments that the talking heads are going to have. But we would all acknowledge that as we sort of move into a deeper SEC, more on that in a moment, a longer playoff, the road to winning a national championship is about to get more challenging and it's about to get more complicated. So this idea that, Well, all you got to do is win your games. As schedules get tougher and tougher and tougher, it becomes almost impossible to be undefeated. We don't ever see undefeated teams in the NFL, for instance, and college football in future years is going to resemble that more. So I do believe that Kirby Smart has, I would say, it would be good for him if he would be a little more comfortable embracing the idea of when there's a debate to be had, even if it's not Kirby himself who's making it, somebody on behalf of Smart, somebody on behalf of Georgia needs to be making that forceful argument. Because I can tell you this, part of the reason that a lot of stuff exists in college football is because of the continued dominance of the SEC. The people that run the sport don't want this to be a regional sport, even though the balance of power exists in a fairly small region of the country right down here in the Southeast. So if it's an argument among seeming equals and one team's from the Midwest and one team's from the SEC, or one team's from the SEC, one team's from the Far West, well, guess who's going to get left out more often than not, as we saw this past December. And that's why I think that Georgia and the rest of the SEC has got to be ready to argue on its own behalf here moving forward, something right there that Kirby Smart does not sound all that eager to do. The narrative is being pushed that the SEC and the Big Ten are now the two big power leagues. They are essentially equals here in college football. Well, that may seem briefly true because Michigan won last year's national championship, but history didn't begin 12 months ago. When you look at the strength of schedule for the upcoming season, the long-standing history of the college football playoff prior to that, and just our own eyes in most of these big games when SEC and Big Ten teams play each other, we see the SEC on the field has obviously been the best. So when there's an argument to be had in the future involving an SEC team and some team from some other league, somebody's got to be comfortable making the argument on behalf of Georgia or the other SEC teams that are involved here. That's what the future of the sport's going to be. A lot more debate, a lot more discussion about who belongs in the college football playoff. And I don't think that Kirby Smart would be wrong if he stood up and said, hey, I'm going to defend my team when it comes to that situation, something that he wasn't all that comfortable doing this past December. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We're glad to have you with us, no matter how you get to us, across all platforms, video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio, 960 The Ref, podcast, wherever you find them. Just really appreciate the show and really appreciate you being a part of it. And want to encourage you on this. We've kind of gotten where we kind of, ask a little something from you here and there, trying not to ask too much. But if you're watching on YouTube, would you mind clicking the like button? That's one of those things that helps other people find the show. We obviously want to make people aware of the show. And that's one of the things that kind of helps us there a little bit. So if you're watching on YouTube, would you mind clicking that like button? It's one of the things they use. They have their own, data formulas, things like that. And when they see those likes rolling in, they start sharing the video with more and more people. So if you like the show, let YouTube know it by clicking that like button. That's a big help to all of us. We got a little bit of show controversy here in a moment. We'll tell you more about that. Let me also remind you, we're brought to you today by our friends at ServPro. Messes to clean up. It sometimes seems like college athletics got a pretty big mess that needs to be cleaned up. Well, there's perhaps for some of you, an even bigger mess to be cleaned up where you live, or where you work, or just some sort of property you got a little bit of stake in, or whatever that situation is, fire damage, water intrusion, the things that can happen. Our friends at ServPro can get it all cleaned up for you and put it back together like it never even happened. That's what the restoration specialists of ServPro are all about. And every ServPro franchise, independently owned and operated there as well. And the reason why I tell you that is because when it comes to, people who've said our business is going to be dedicated to serving people in a time of need, the kind of panic that sets in when you see fire break out, of course you would, or when a water main breaks and that creates all kinds of, messy situations. You wonder what's going to happen, what can we do, and how can we get this looking like it did before? How can we make this look like it never happened? Well, that's where the folks at ServPro step in. We call them restoration specialists because restoring your property to its pristine condition, that's what they are all about. So find them online. It's servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com. You can find them today. We're glad to have ServPro bringing DawgNation Daily to you. All right, so let me also do this real quick here just for a moment. We are coming down near the end on our DawgNation Invasion giveaway. Someone's going to win their way into what they call it, Darrell Royal Stadium there in Austin for the game in October. We're obviously doing a huge DawgNation Invasion event in Austin there that weekend, and we've been talking to you about that. but we're also giving folks a chance right now to be a winner on this. So I want you to go to the website. It's DawgNation.com/tailgate. If you have not registered for your chance there yet on this, I want you to get in. We're getting down to the deadline on that here right now. So somebody's going to win tickets to the game. They're going to win a couple of passes to our Friday night football party the night before the game, the all-inclusive Dog Nation Invasion tailgate the day of the game. As I said before, tickets to the game, and, of course, a couple of nights hotel stay. They're in Austin there as well. So why don't you go to DawgNation.com/tailgate to find out more about this. DawgNation.com/tailgate to register for your chance. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this right now is because the deadline to enter is 11:59 p.m. tomorrow night. That's Wednesday, June 5th. So you got to get in and get registered if you have not already. Thousands of you have already. But if you want your chance to win your opportunity here, 11:59 tomorrow night, that's your chance. That's the deadline. Then we'll announce the winner on June 7th, I believe it is. So it's DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. Getting down to the deadline to get registered there on that. Okay, so we're going to go around the doghouse here before we bring on Connor Riley here in a moment. We're going to have some fun with him. And I'm excited as we go around the doghouse here today to welcome in a brand new sponsor to our program. It's Georgia Safe Retirement, bringing around the doghouse to us here today. So really, really excited about having them on board and excited about doing Around the Doghouse with you here right now. And, we were talking about some of the stuff that Kirby Smart had to say last week at SEC spring meetings when he was there in Destin, Florida. And one of the things that also came up around the idea of like scheduling and things like that, one of the things that did come up was, what this league is now going to look like with Georgia also having to travel out to Austin and take on Texas, the presence of the Longhorns, the presence of the Oklahoma Sooners now in the SEC, what that is going to look like. And, Kirby Smart talked about that last week, and he said one point that he sort of, made before, and in discussing this also kind of got a little bit more into detail about just how the league is now it's obviously going to feel different, but it's going to look different there as well. And so I wanted to play this because I think it kind of fits into what we're discussing here today about, schedules and, all of that. What Kirby Smart said in the spring meetings last week about two new teams being in the SEC, what this means for the league. Let me let you hear Kirby Smart on that point.
Yeah, it's extremely tough. I mean, the fact that they're in our conference, they're further away, they're a powerful football team, they're got a great state to recruit in. Both their coaching staffs are really good. Sark and Brent both have SEC kind of experience, and Brent being over in the ACC and playing at Clemson, he's played SEC teams kind of forever. So they both know the climate they're jumping into, and we think it makes our conference better. Our brand extends further west, and two tremendous programs. When you add those two in, it makes the scheduling, much tougher.
So a couple of different things from Kirby Smart on that. To start with, there are like a couple of different times in that clip that Smart referenced something that I think does not get enough attention, is that the SEC is now going to feel a little bit different because the league is getting bigger. I mean, geographically wider, geographically larger. And that's just going to feel different. Smart talked about that. Hey, our brand's extending, farther into the West, and the space of the league is getting wider. And that's definitely going to create a little bit of a different vibe. For Georgia fans who like traveling to games, the average distance traveled per road game over the course of like the next 4 years is going to go way up. We've gotten used to, it's South Carolina or Tennessee every other year. It's Auburn every other year. Georgia's been lucky to have a lot of, conference opponents relatively close that kind of kept the average distance traveled per road game, fairly low for Georgia in most years. You have the trip to Missouri or the trip to Kentucky that can be a little longer, but Missouri certainly. But for the most part, the average distance traveled is pretty short. Well, I would say moving forward for Georgia fans who like to traveling a little longer to get to some of these games, it's going to feel a little bit different. There's no doubt about that. And when you start bringing in kind of different geographical areas, because I would say the Southwest, where Texas is located, and to a degree where Oklahoma is located, is a good bit different than the SEC. Getting agreement on things moving forward with two more stakeholders in the league, with sort of a different geographic presence, I think that's now going to be a little bit more difficult. I think we're kind of in a day and age now where the SEC's had a hard time finding unanimity on should they be playing an 8 or a 9-game schedule. And there are other issues where perhaps there's not quite as much unanimous agreement as there's always been in the past. And I think in a larger SEC where a lot more people from a lot different parts of the country are now represented, finding that agreement in the SEC moving forward may not always be an easy thing to do, and that just may be reflected. So when Kirby Smart talks about the league getting bigger and extending farther west, there's a degree to which that's really going to matter, and it's going to show up in terms of meetings like this where, hey, perhaps not everybody's agreeing and getting along quite as well as they always have in the past. But the other thing here is, and Kirby Smart has touched on this now a couple of times in the offseason, that no doubt the presence of these two traditional powers, certainly Oklahoma and Texas, at least theoretically, has been a little bit of a power. SEC schedules are now going to get tough, and we saw Georgia a moment ago. According to the ESPN FPI, the third toughest schedule in America to begin the year, according to those Football Power Index ratings. But when you kind of dive deeper in this and you just sort of look, according to FPI, kind of who's ranked where, add those two numbers together, you can make a case that the biggest games of the year, Georgia's essentially a common factor in so many of those. When you look at also what ESPN published yesterday, the two biggest games in America for the upcoming season from an FPI standpoint both involve Georgia. Against Texas, the biggest game of all, second biggest game against Alabama. But you've also got, within the top 10 here, Georgia against Ole Miss, Georgia against Clemson, even Georgia against Tennessee. All of these games sort of found kind of in that sort of top 12, top 15 in terms of the biggest games of the upcoming season. So when Kirby Smart says, hey, our schedule's a lot tougher because of the presence of a team like Texas in the SEC, the data backs that up. You compare Georgia to other teams competing for a championship. None of them are playing in as many big games this year as Georgia is. Kirby Smart pointing that out. The ESPN FPI data sort of backing that up. So for fans, I think it gets more fun. For the coaches and players, perhaps more challenging. But it is a new-look SEC, one that kind of features a lot more travel than it did in the past and a lot more compelling football games. But I think a lot of people have a lot of reason to be excited about that. And that is Around the Doghouse today, brought to you by our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners. As we said before, really, really happy to have Georgia Safe Retirement Planners as a part of DawgNation Daily here this week. And one of the reasons why is because I love the word they have in their name, the word safe, because when it comes to your own retirement, well, of course, that's what you want, right? This is your future, and you deserve to have the kind of future that you've dreamed about, the kind of future that you want. And that's what Georgia Safe Retirement Planners is all about. You can get the peace of mind to know that there's no upfront risk to you, that your financial security is made possible and taken care of by our friends at Georgia Safe Retirement Planners. You can get that free, no-obligation retirement planning conversation with them. You can do that right now. I want you to go online to GeorgiaSafeRetirementPlanners.com. That's the website once again, GeorgiaSafeRetirementPlanners.com. Have a conversation about your future. What do you need to do to secure your financial future through your retirement? How do you get a chance to enjoy all the dreams you have for the next phase of your life? That's what Georgia Safe Retirement Planners are all about. They're delivering Around the Doghouse to us here today. We're glad to have them here. I want you to check them out online. GeorgiaSafeRetirementPlanners.com for more on that today. All right, so we got a lot to do on the program here today. A lot of stuff involving Georgia and kind of where it's ranked according to ESPN, and a hot topic involving a new Georgia player that kind of bubbled up last week that's getting, frankly, a lot of attention, and discussing where this is going next is probably pretty interesting. And as we told you before, a little bit of show controversy there as well. So let's see if we can cover all of this ground with Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. Glad to have him and all of you with us here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, lots to talk to Connor Riley about. Getting a chance to do this for the first time in a little while after I was away from work last week, and we had some evergreen pre-recorded shows. But before we get into the serious football part of all this, we got some show controversy. Yesterday, Connor Riley called out by one of our esteemed guests, the legendary former Georgia All-American Jon Stinchcomb, a distinguished member of the UGA Athletic Board, a guy who served with honor and distinction. But apparently none of that good enough to earn the handshake from Connor Riley there last week at the very, very posh and luxurious Ritz-Carlton there at Lake Oconee. Let's see Jon Stinchcomb from yesterday, and let's give Connor Riley a chance to defend himself.
Connor stiff-armed me. Let me throw that out there. I said, hey, to Connor as he was walking to his section, and yeah, he just kept walking. So, hey, Connor, how about next time just some sort of acknowledgement that we know each other would have been nice.
Good for you for calling him out. Good for you for calling him out. Absolutely. That's the right decision.
Well, sadly, he doesn't have a microphone in front of him right now, so he can respond. But maybe he didn't hear me. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But
so, Connor, very disappointing. I mean, Jon Stinchcomb is a guy that, I mean, talk about DGD. We debate often who does qualify to become a DGD. No one disputes Jon Stinchcomb's status, both on and off the field, as one of the legendary dogs, one of the great, men that has embodied everything that the University of Georgia is supposed to be about. And yet, can't even get a hello from you there at Ritz-Carlton. I'm sure you had a date at the lunch buffet or, something like that. You had some pool time coming up. So, perhaps that was what's on your mind. Maybe a tea time. I don't know. But man, disappointing that our guy John got treated so roughly.
No, there's no excuses here. I didn't hear him say hello. And, John and I have run into each other at a number of athletic board meetings, and we don't always have time to, chit-chat and say hello. But I just straight up dropped the ball here. Even if I didn't hear him, that's still not an excuse. I'm not exactly the most sociable person in the world, but should still say, go up and say, hey, not just to a DGD, but a great coworker and friend in Jon Stinchcomb. So that's 100% on me. And next time I see him, not only will I shake hello, I'll go up and shake his hand and apologize for the great misjustice that I have caused.
And as you said, in fairness to you, you're not typically looking to be like glad handing and back, sort of back patting a situation like this. You're usually head down, kind of taking care of the business at hand, doing your work. You're not, always, looking to kind of be at the center of attention in a room like that. So that's not exactly your scene anyway, necessarily. Is that fair?
No, yeah. I mean, between us, you're the politician that is kissing hands and shaking babies, and I'm the one who's sort of the chief of staff in the background, just sort of monitoring everything and keeping things going there. So just two different personalities there.
Fair enough. So we were talking a little bit before about, Georgia being ranked #1 in the release of the ESPN Football Power Index. We've kind of gotten sort of the peak off season when ESPN now has like multiple analytics formulas they're just sort of throwing out there. Georgia ranked #1 in both of them here right now. And so we can kind of push that aside because I don't think anybody's all that surprised by that. But one of the points I made a little earlier also was, that to me it's a false narrative that everybody wants to kind of couple the SEC and the Big Ten together. Frankly, I think it's Greg Sankey to his error that so many people are treating both these leagues as equals here at the moment. But we even saw that in one of the write-ups from Neil Payne at ESPN.com that, it's the SEC, the Big Ten. They're sort of far ahead of everybody else in college football. While that is true, the point that I made earlier is it's also true that the SEC, at least on the field, remains far ahead of the Big Ten on the basis of the data that ESPN itself shared. And it seems like we're not maybe talking quite enough about that. Do you agree with that point?
Yeah, the way these numbers are kind of formulated and tabulated and whatnot, they're all kind of shady and, done in dark rooms and things like that. So it is tough to get a true evaluation on that. And I don't put necessarily a ton of value into these computer numbers at this point. Quite frankly, I don't know how much you should put into any. I think part of the problem with college football in terms of making these grand evaluations, and you say this all the time, BA, it's the longest off season and the shortest actual season for any sport, certainly that we care about. And so because of that, you have to make these grand sort of proclamations, predictions based off just very limited sample size there in that regard. So when it comes to the SEC and the Big Ten and how it all sort of focuses out, yes, because the SEC recruits so well and because, Georgia and Alabama have won so many national championships, and then you even see last year Ole Miss and Missouri picking up New Year's Six bowl wins, those sort of things tend to help these sorts of numbers here. But, for example, the ESPN FPI sees Florida as a top 20 team this season, in part because of the returning talent, the way they did in the transfer portal. But I think you can look at, say, their schedule there and find some pretty clear holes in saying, I'd be shocked if Florida is a top 20 team this season. And so I think, and this is maybe more a personal point that has larger questions and concerns, I think sometimes we lose track of the games that matter themselves and look at other things and other factors and things like that. I know Tennessee fans love to point to the weather when it comes to, say, that 2022 Athens game there. What at the end of the day, what happens on the field still has to matter most, in my opinion. And so I think the way that a lot of these advanced analytics and comparisons with the Big Ten and the SEC all sort of come together, look at what happens on the field. And yeah, you can say Ohio State wasn't super interested in the Cotton Bowl last year, but Missouri still went out there and beat them and limited that offense in a real interesting way that day. So I think at the end of the day, games on the field, to me, are what still matter the most in this regard.
And along those lines, I mean, listen, there's a lot about the future of college football that I don't know that I'm fully on board for. I don't know that I'm fully, excited about, and we've at times talked about some of that kind of stuff. But this stuff, when you think about, well, Georgia's going to play Texas, and Georgia's going to play Alabama, and, Oregon's going to play Ohio State, and, there's no doubt the season's more interesting. And, I do find myself pro 12-team playoff in terms of a better national champion, a more proven national champion, whether it ends up being Georgia or ends up being somebody else. I find the 12-team playoff a better mechanism for proving who the best team is. But, man, I am all in on the excitement of the upcoming season. I don't trust the powers that be to still, figure it all out and make, good quality decisions, even with more data to consider. I still don't trust them to necessarily get it right. But in terms of the football action we get to see, I think the product on the field is set up to be better this year. And I think this ESPN stuff they've kind of rolled out, gives you an indication of at least a reminder to me of just how true that is. These are really very fun games.
Yeah, and I hope, and this is something that Kirby Smart said last week at SEC spring meetings, in the past, we've been deciding around the 4th, the 5th, the 6th best team in the sport and who that might be. Those teams, in my mind, have a real chance of winning a national championship every year. And so there is great consternation and debate over those teams and who should be in. Georgia, for example, last year was the number 5 team in the country. And I think you could make a very clear case that they were going to win that they could have won the national championship. I think with a 12-team playoff, my hope, and we'll see how this plays out, if we're really hammering away and yelling and screaming about the 10th, 11th, 12th best teams in college football, Kirby Smart used 13, 14, 15 as an example, I don't think that those debates are going to be so contentious and take away from what we see on the field. And so I do and agree with you in that regard, BA, that, the 6th or the 7th best team this year could, get hot, win a couple of games, maybe not even potentially win the national championship, but have a greater impact in deciding it, rather than letting people with off the field agendas go in and sort of decide, okay, here's who gets in. For example, I know, look, the Florida State thing was tired last year, and were they one of the best 4 teams at the end of the season? Probably not. But if you go out there and you win every game and do everything that you need to do, you should have the right, in my opinion, to go play for a national championship. And they were robbed of that. And I think that negatively impacted the sport of college football moving forward and unfolded a lot of the things that we've seen this offseason that, quite frankly, we just don't like talking about. So I think if we're getting farther away from that and in that sense, having the games on the field matter more in those 12, 13 discussions, I think is going to be a good thing for the sport, because it does, in my opinion, allow us to focus more on the games themselves, which is the biggest reason why college football is as beloved as a sport as it is.
So I want to move on to something else that was a big deal last week. And admittedly, this has kind of been a bigger deal to other people than it probably seems like it is to me. And maybe I'm just not thinking about this as sharply as I should. The Jaden Rashada lawsuit, Florida people have treated this like it's a pretty big deal. Greg Sankey sort of treated it like it's a pretty big deal. I guess I'm a little surprised by how much this is sort of being viewed as, ooh, this is a thing. And, Greg Sankey says, I don't like lawsuits. And when this first came out, a lot of Florida people were like, I'm talking about reporter types, things like that, were really trying to kind of dig deep on this a little bit. I kind of took Kirby Smart at his word last week at face value that he didn't know much about it, didn't think much about it. This idea that, he gave it his blessing, that was kind of a fun thing to kind of talk about when it first came out. I thought what Smart said last week sort of felt to me a little bit more like the actual truth. I guess I don't expect all that much to come out of this Rashada thing, where I'm sure there may be a small settlement and it'll probably be, undisclosed, and, neither party is going to be able to talk about it very much. I assume that by the time we get to the season, we mostly forget about this. But there's also a chance I'm not seeing this as a big a deal as it is, because clearly kind of people outside my own bubble here are treating it like a bigger deal. I've mostly just laughed at it because it's kind of funny that, the Georgia quarterback is suing the Florida coach. but other people are treating this slightly more serious. How serious do you think the Rashada lawsuit actually is?
I think I'm with you on this. I think this is a bigger headline than it is an actual story. Now, is this going to be something we probably see more of in the future in terms of NIL deals going bad and potential lawsuits? Certainly in that regard. And I think because this is the first one of this sort of magnitude, it lends itself to that. But Florida's not going to let this go to discovery. They're not going to open themselves up to that sort of thing there. And Rashada, as I think you point out, and again, I'm not a law expert by any means necessary there. I don't think that this is a big deal. I think Kirby has handled this about as well as he can. Again, he was not very involved with it. And for the fact, in reading over the lawsuit itself, this has been something that had been brewing for a long time, no matter where Rashada ended up at. It just so happened that Georgia, I think, fit both from what Rashada was looking for in terms of stability and what Georgia was looking for in terms of a player that could come in and ultimately compete to maybe potentially one day be a starting quarterback. That's why he is at Georgia. But say if he were at Auburn, I think that this lawsuit would still be a thing there. So I think, again, that this is something where, it's not going to play out in a courtroom scene like The Social Network or A Few Good Men. It's going to be something where, it gets done rather quietly and they move on from it, or maybe even potentially gets outright dismissed. And for the Florida fans wanting to go, how does this impact Billy Napier's job security and whatnot? The NCAA can't currently investigate NIL-related infractions. So he's not going to lose his job because of this. Is it a black mark on the university? Sure, I guess so, but Florida's not the only program that has had issues with NIL in that regard. This is unfortunately, I think, just the way where we are in college football. And, look, and you and I have talked about this, and maybe this is something where the Georgia-Florida rivalry has lost a little bit of steam in recent years. Kirby Smart and Billy Napier, those guys are friends. They are not adversaries. It is not as contentious as it was with Dan Mullen and Kirby Smart. I think if they were playing Survivor together, I wouldn't be shocked if Napier and Smart were allies just because of the past relationship at Alabama there. They're working together. I think they like each other. I think Kirby Smart wants to see Billy Napier succeed in some regard because I think he knows that he can continuously beat Billy Napier. So, I don't think this is going to be something that ultimately costs Napier's job. At the end of the day, I still think they're going to have to find a way to win games for him to remain the head coach of Florida there. But I think that this is something where the headline makes it seem like it's a really big story, but then when you sort of crack it open and look at it, there's not a whole lot there, especially, I think, from a UGA angle in particular.
Yeah, the final point I'd make about this topic is, if it could be proven that Napier knew that NIL figures were making a promise to Rashada they were not going to be able to keep, and they were just going to figure it out once Rashada got on campus, well, I do think that Napier's behaved wrongly. And if he did do that, he's obviously not the only coach who did, so this isn't unique to Napier necessarily. But I do think stuff like that should be called out. I just think the sort of legal mumbo-jumbo of this sometimes is so complicated that you can't really sift through what really did happen, and everything is sort of from someone's point of view and someone's perspective. But if Napier did allow NIL people to make a promise that he had good reason to know they wouldn't be able to keep, then he's clearly behaved wrongly. I just have a hard time believing there's any kind of smoking gun that proves that definitively.
Right. And in reading over the lawsuit, it's important to point out, I think, that a lot of what is being alleged with Napier, it's verbal. It's not written down. Yeah. It's not in a text message. There's no hard proof as it stands right now in this lawsuit that Napier is doing the things that he had said were alleged. And so I think getting that proven in the court of law is going to be difficult. And quite frankly, I don't think Florida is going to let this get to the courts there. I don't think they're going to open themselves up to wider examination of this program under Billy Napier here. That's just not how lawsuits work in this day and age, especially with something as big budgeted as Florida football. So again, yes, this is all unseemly. And does this have a negative impact on Billy Napier moving forward? Probably so. But I don't think that this is going to be the thing that gets him canned from Florida. And at the end of the day, I do think that Rashada, while obviously looking to recoup some of the monetary value he lost that he had been promised, I don't think that Rashada wants this to be his defining legacy either. I think at the end of the day, he wants to get on the field and play football at the University of Georgia.
Since the show's come on the air, we now know Georgia's schedule for the upcoming Super Regional against NC State. It's going to begin at noon on Saturday. The game's going to be on ESPNU, so regular television for these, for those who are not lucky enough to be in Foley Field. I guess we're still waiting. I think, so tickets go on sale for this on Wednesday. They'll only going to be, the problem with stuff like this is only a small number of these tickets are actually going to make their way to like the open market here because it's obviously a very small venue, Foley Field. So tickets are clearly going to be at a premium. But how much fun did you have with the regional that concluded there on Sunday night? And how excited are you on behalf of Georgia fans here for a super regional coming up on Saturday? I tell you, I love the baseball postseason. I'm glad to see, not just with Georgia this year, but in recent years across the entirety of the sport, I'm glad to see it getting more national attention because I think it's a phenomenal event. And, man, I've been jealous for years to watch other SEC teams have fun in it. And now to see Georgia fans having as much fun as anybody. Connor, I just think this is a blast. What have you thought of this ride that Georgia's been going on here?
Yeah, it's unquestionably a great product. And I think, and you and I have talked about this on your show before. Obviously football is the number one engine driver here at the University of Georgia, but I think for a long time, fans have been looking for something in either men's basketball or baseball to sort of latch onto and really ride the bandwagon. You can include women's basketball in there as well. And it seems like Georgia baseball has finally given that to us. It's the first time they're going to a super regional since 2008. That was also the last time they went to the College World Series. Ironically enough, they played NC State in that super regional back then in 2008. And in watching the games this weekend, the atmosphere was electric. Mike Griffith can attest to that. I'm sure you guys will touch on that in your show tomorrow. And that game on Sunday night, rather, was as thrilling of a Georgia sporting event as we've had this year. The back and forth nature of it, the big play made by Chandler Marsh there. And what was ironically his only out in that game, but he made the big play when it needed to. Clutch hitting. And for me, not just by Charlie Condon, he had the home run in Friday's win over Army. But you watch that Saturday game, it's freshman Trey Harris. Yeah. It's Colby Branch with the tying home run in the 9th. And then in the top of the 10th, yes, they are gifted a run by a throwing error by Georgia Tech. But then Corey Collins knocks home 2 runs with a key RBI double. And so it's everything else that sort of comes together here. And, this has already been an extremely successful season for Wes Johnson in his first year at the University of Georgia. It's something to build on moving forward. But you've made it this far to super regionals. You might as well go out there and win 2 more games and continue to build for the future of this program. Because Charlie Condon has gone after this year. Corey Collins has gone after this year. They've got to continue to do the things that build on this so that this isn't a once in a 15-year sort of thing. And I do think that this is something that they can build on and hopefully do continue because it has been a ton of fun for the Georgia fan base. And as they get ready to host their first regional since 2008, bring out your sunglasses. It's going to be bright. It's going to be warm. It's going to be a great summer weekend at the ballpark. And that's just something Georgia fans haven't gotten to experience a whole lot of in the month of June in recent seasons.
And I'll say this very quick. I think that Wes Johnson's got a real chance to make a real name for himself with Georgia fans. And I've been very honest about this. When he was hired, this kind of like analytics-minded pitching guru, I didn't really know what that was going to be. Is this going to be some egg-headed guy that doesn't relate to people? But honestly, he gives off managerial vibes to me. And I know in college baseball we call them coaches, obviously, but like the sort of idea of like the even-keeled manager, the way that Bobby Cox or Brian Snitker has been, at their best. The kind of guy that just says, hey, we got another moment to come back out here, and we're not going to get too high, we're not going to get too low. We're just going to take the game, whatever it deals to us. We're just going to take whatever we're dealt. I think that Wes Johnson really gives off managerial vibes here. And in future years, you assume he'll probably get even better pitching, obviously, than he's got, here right now, which to me speaks for a even greater opportunity for success. I really like Johnson's personality, and I think that he has a chance to kind of ingratiate himself to Georgia fans in a way that a non-football coach probably hasn't done around this campus in a very long time.
I'm going to give Josh Brooks a ton of credit here. When this hire was announced, there was a lot of skepticism within the Georgia fan base, but also from the national baseball media fan base. There was the thought that Georgia had maybe gone cheap, that they weren't going to spend big to bring in an established coach. Wes Johnson had never been a head coach at the SEC level before. And Wes Johnson has pushed all the right buttons this year. Obviously, you see the improvements that Charlie Condon made, but not necessarily a great pitching staff this year, and he's found a way to get it to work. And I think you look at what Leighton Finley did this weekend. Starts game 1 on Friday, doesn't have the best start, but then comes in the 10th inning on Sunday night and is able to go out there and get the save. And so, again, I think building is going to be key for Wes Johnson moving forward. But I completely agree with you. It was a great first season for Johnson. He's going to continue to build off this. I do want to give a special shout out to one of my buddies here, Chris Gilmore. Chris has been working with Georgia since 2015, I believe. He does a lot of the video work with the Georgia baseball team in particular. And for years, he's been trying to get me to come out to a Georgia baseball game. And part of it is I've been doing so much with football and I have so much going on. This is really the quiet time of the season for me, and I try to enjoy that. After Sunday night's game in the win, I texted him and I said, hey, it might be time I finally come out to a Georgia baseball game. And he texted me, do not come, do not stay, given the vibes that they've had this season. But there have been a lot of long-suffering Georgia baseball fans who I think have been waiting for a moment like this. And I'm excited for people, not just like Chris, but everyone in the Georgia fan base to get to experience that this weekend.
I really appreciate that, Connor. Great stuff. We'll look forward to reading plenty from you there at DawgNation.com in the days to come. And, of course, having you back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Serpro there as well.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, really fun stuff from Connor, and a fun look at what was a great weekend this past weekend, and obviously looking ahead to this upcoming weekend with NC State coming to town. Series begins for Georgia on Saturday, so you're thinking about a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, if necessary, deal there. So Georgia and NC State tickets going on sale tomorrow for fans. You get in there, obviously the secondary market will be kind of hot and heavy there on that. If you have a chance to go, you need to be there. And I'm just here to tell you, I'm talking about, I'm just not a commercial for Georgia. This is just me saying this sort of fan to fan here, is that, the experience that I think the people who were there this past weekend had, it's the kind of thing that, I obviously wasn't able to be there in person. My son had his own baseball games this weekend, but watching on TV, obviously everybody who was there was obviously having a blast. So if you're lucky enough to be there for this upcoming weekend, take good advantage of those tickets. Go there, be ready to make some noise. This is a college atmosphere for baseball games, and it's going to be really fun, really special. Looking forward to all of that. All right, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And there are some conversations happening behind the scenes here. We could have something fun to announce here very, very soon, and I can't wait to tell you about that as it relates to DawgNation and Royal Caribbean. Hint, hint. We'll drop that little nugget there for you. But for now, let me also brag about the fact that I'm only a few weeks away also from my inaugural sailing on board Utopia of the Seas. It's the brand new Oasis-class ship for Royal Caribbean. It's debuting here in the month of July, and I just feel so blessed, so fortunate to be among the very first to set sail on all of that. And what I love is not just the fact that it's a brand new ship from Royal Caribbean, but also the fact that as Royal Caribbean introduces a new ship, they're introducing so many cool new things on board, new restaurant concepts, or taking some of the things you kind of come to expect from Royal Caribbean, putting kind of a fun new twist on that, including the Pesky Parrot Bar. And this is going to be right there in the Royal Promenade. They're saying, and the Royal Promenade is like the area, kind of the center part of the ship. It's sort of the main thoroughfare, one of the cool neighborhoods. And they're saying, what if we make the Royal Promenade even more fun by putting kind of a big tropical themed bar like that? And of course, there's never any shortage of bars and lounges on board a ship like this. The lime and coconut there around the pool deck, expanded pool deck that's bigger and more fun than ever before. You can sit there and listen and enjoy all the tropical music and the beautiful views looking over the ocean. Just so many fun things in store for you on board Utopia of the Seas as it debuts here in July. So you hear me talk about it, but our friend Jessica Slater, a terrific travel agent, can tell you even more about it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, for a lot more on that. She can get you booked up, whether it's Utopia of the Seas or a different Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. She can get you squared away on a great one. By the way, our friend Jeff Sintel getting ready to come back from his Royal Caribbean cruise vacation in Alaska. Can't wait to hear more from him about that. That's going to be a ton of fun. So while I was gone on vacation last week and away from work, one of the stories that kind of popped up that I thought was maybe the most interesting was a thing from Matt Hayes, Saturday Down South, as it relates to the big game coming up between LSU and USC in Las Vegas to kick off the season. And we've been kind of interested in this game because it sort of represents an entry into like Las Vegas, trying to get involved in some of these week one neutral site games, the way that Atlanta always has been and Dallas kind of has been, sometimes Orlando, Charlotte, Nashville. cities like that want to host these neutral site games. Las Vegas has seen the success that cities have had with that, and they wanted to kind of do the same thing. And so USC, which obviously has a big presence out west, LSU fans that like to travel, seemed like a pretty good way to start all of this. Of maybe maybe Las Vegas becomes kind of a player in the week one neutral site, non-conference space, the way that other cities kind of have. Well, come to find out, what Matt Hayes reported at Saturday on South is, while a lot of people are excited about the USC and LSU game, apparently one of the people not too excited about that are people at USC, Lincoln Riley in particular, because what Hayes reported for Saturday Down South is that USC tried for nearly 2 years to find a way out of a contract to play LSU in Las Vegas because Trojans coach Lincoln Riley didn't want the game. Multiple sources told Saturday on South. They went, deep into all of this. He says as late as last fall, after Jen Cohen was hired away from Washington to be the new USC athletic director, the USC administration was still trying to get out of the game, including offering other opponents to LSU. So this is how hard they were willing to work not to play the game. And, this kind of comes on the heels of a lot of people's belief that Lincoln Riley ending up at USC because after having been offered the LSU job, or at least rumors that he was, in the mix of the LSU job, not wanting that because, as some people thought, he didn't want to have to play the SEC schedule. Then finding out that Oklahoma was going to be playing the SEC schedule, not wanting that either. So therefore, he goes out to USC and then tries to get out of the game, at least according to Matt Hayes reporting here, against the SEC opponent to begin the 2024 season. And obviously no one stepped up to dispute this reporting yet. Hayes says he has multiple sources that are willing to confirm that. And I just think that paints kind of an unflattering picture of Lincoln Riley here right now. And there is perhaps no coach who has seen his star drop more over the course of the last, couple of years than maybe Lincoln Riley, with the exception of perhaps guys like Jimbo Fisher no longer coaching. But in terms of what Riley was thought to be when he was hired at USC, kind of what he's sort of viewed to be now, this is a guy whose star has clearly toppled just a bit because they had Caleb Williams. Williams was the number 1 overall pick. He won the Heisman Trophy, but USC didn't really win anything with him at all. And now they kind of go into the Big Ten. But as you enter into this new era for the Big Ten, there's far more chatter about a team like Oregon than there's a team like USC. At one point in time, USC was kind of viewed to be the centerpiece of the Big Ten's kind of ambitious expansion aspirations. But as it stands now, a program like Oregon, led by Dan Lanning, a more organized NIL structure, better high school recruiting overall, it seems like Oregon has kind of pushed USC off the spot that it was, and it's just not obvious that Lincoln Riley wants the level of competition that is demanded when you're playing teams like LSU, which was perhaps the reason that Matt Hayes is reporting that he tried to get out of the game. And the final, take from me on this is, what does this say about the state of college football in Los Angeles? That the two major programs, USC and UCLA, you had the coach of UCLA voluntarily demote himself. Chip Kelly goes and becomes an offensive coordinator because he couldn't handle that smoke. And you've got Lincoln Riley running from, at least allegedly, reportedly, a game like this against LSU. See, this is part of the problem that college football has, which is, as I kind of alluded to before, the people that run the sport want it to be a national sport. And they look at the dominance of the SEC and say that dominance is not good for us. But the real problem sometimes is the other regions in the country, such as the far west, such as the major population center in Los Angeles, the programs that exist in places like this, they're not living up to their end of the bargain. Like, you've got to be more competitive than this, than your coach becoming an offensive coordinator, your USC coach running allegedly from top competition. You got to be more competitive than this. It's a very interesting report from Matt Hayes, Saturday Down South, and it does not paint a very flattering picture of Lincoln Riley whatsoever. Now, to go back to the ESPN Power Index stuff for a moment, the other thing that I thought was pretty interesting that kind of came out of all of this was the fact that, teams that we don't think of as a big part of the upcoming season, SEC rivals to Georgia, apparently they're getting a little bit more love from the FPI than perhaps you would have guessed. In particular, one of the teams that got written up here was Florida. And, on the basis of some returning starters coming back, that Florida is one of the teams making the biggest jump in the FPI ranking for the upcoming year, that's one of the things that Neil Payne wrote about at ESPN.com. But in addition to Florida, who's perhaps climbing higher in this and rated higher than you would expect, given the fact that we don't think that Florida's going to, perhaps make a bowl game, and Billy Napier could, very likely get fired. In addition to that, you've also got Tennessee and Auburn all ranked in the top 20 here right now of the ESPN FPI. It's one of the reasons why the Georgia schedule is so tough, is because teams like this actually rate fairly high in the FPI, perhaps higher than you think they might. So it is certainly an interesting thing right now where, year two expectations for Hugh Freeze, not particularly high. Tennessee trying to bounce back after a, pretty disappointing follow-up to a, kind of a breakthrough season in 2022. So far, I don't know that people expect all that much. But when you look at the ESPN FPI stuff, these teams that are kind of rivals to Georgia and on the Georgia schedule, like Florida, like Tennessee, like Auburn, getting a little bit of love here from the analytics stuff. And so that'll be interesting to watch as Georgia plays these teams this season, and as we watch to see how they kind of figure their way around this new look and much tougher SEC. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we say goodbye here, we'll get ready for a golden shoe. And we've talked a lot about college baseball, of course, the last couple of days. And one of the things that people have had some fun with, including our buddy Meriwether Dog, who sent this in here, the fact that Alabama was eliminated from the NCAA Regional against the Hatters of Stetson from DeLand, Florida, just outside of Orlando. And, of course, the idea that Alabama would be eliminated by a Stetson brings to mind, of course, Stetson Bennett, who did the same thing in the 2021 National Championship game. Meriwether Dog writing in that the legend of Stetson still haunts Gumpville, which is a very funny stuff, and a lot of folks were kind of having some fun with that. So we'll give Bo Dog there a golden shoe for enjoying Stetson beating up on Alabama, something we have all very enjoyably seen before. Lousy, stinking Gators, they may be ranked in the top 20 of the FPI, but the number that matters for us is 1,305. It's been 1,305 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see you all back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, we're going to take some comments here. We are not going to go crazy long today. I apologize. I got a few things I got to take care of today, but we want to try to make good use of your time there as well. So let's see if we can do that. David Hogue, thanks for the kind words here. He says, got to cut up some more trees from the May 10th Tallahassee tornadoes. Well, David, you be careful out there doing all of that, and hope all those folks in the capital city there are doing well. We appreciate you being a part of the show. Thanks so much. Randy Hall asking, will Jeff be on Wednesday night? I assume that he probably will be. So we'll get a nice recruiting update for him there on that. Rambo making mention of Connor's Mighty Ducks hat that he's wearing today, the Anaheim Ducks. So there you go. That's good stuff. Let's see if we can also get some comments here on Facebook for a moment. We'll bounce around all the various comment sections. Hope you're all doing great today. Let us see. You're here on Facebook just for a moment. David Wayne Carroll and having some fun in here. You love to see that. Alex Lundeen wondering if Georgia could beat Texas by 21 points. Let them know that Texas is not back. Here's what I'm here to tell you. The city of Austin has no idea what it's in for if Georgia wins that game by 21 points. That could be a lot of fun. That's good stuff. Sleisha Gagnon says, she knows I'm a WWE fan. I've been following the Uncle Howdy stuff. So I've kind of been a little bit lapsed post-WrestleMania. I was actually thinking about that today. I need to get back in and see what's been going on with wrestling. I saw I don't know. I saw something, a couple of things that made me realize I hadn't watched wrestling too much post-WrestleMania. So I got to get back in and kind of see what that's looking like. Got to get ready for SummerSlam here coming up. And then I guess you got Money in the Bank in July too, right? So that's one of my favorite events as well. So I got to get ready for these events coming up that I like. So we'll do that. But I have not seen a ton of that lately. William Camacho lives in Daytona Beach. How about that? I'm a big Daytona fan. Big Daytona fan. I didn't realize that's where you lived. Pete Williams says that Riley is a decent coach, but he just ain't good enough. Yeah, I mean, clearly Riley is a sharp offensive mind. And at one point in time, I think people sort of thought that college football was destined to be dominated by the sharp offensive minds. But college football kind of always been a complete sport where you have to be good at everything. And Riley's just not good enough, the toughness part of the game. And so, therefore, he sort of seemingly runs from any team that perhaps has that. Let's see what else. Joseph Kennedy says that Brian Kelly's accent is faker than Milli Vanilli, which was clearly a misstep for him, and we said it as much. And his aftermath of how he tried to handle that was maybe even worse. I don't dispute any of that. But, Kelly's also not had a bad start to his LSU career. I mean, at a certain point in time, the pressure he's going to face is that the only thing that really matters there is, can you win a national championship? The 3 previous LSU coaches before him all won national championships. So that's clearly the standard by which he's going to be judged as well. But, a couple of years on the job, I don't think it's been bad 2 years for Kelly necessarily. I mean, there are SEC coaches who are doing much worse. Let me go to YouTube here. So Georgia baseball beginning on Saturday against NC State. A little bit of a different feel to this because, when you're in the SEC tournament, you're kind of playing a little bit of a single elimination deal, and you kind of move into the round robin, and then the regionals, obviously the round robin. You get to the College World Series, you at least begin with the 8-team format, whether it's winner's bracket, loser's bracket, things like that. This is the one thing that sort of feels more like traditional sports, and the same 2 teams in a best-of-3 series, a little bit more traditional. One of the few times that baseball kind of gives us something quite like that. Jonathan Aaron says, didn't Chipper go to Stetson? He would have, but Chipper was drafted out of high school. He went to the Bowles School in Jacksonville. That's a high school, and went straight to the pros after that. He may have gone to Stetson, but he went straight to the pros out of high school. Paul Moon says, I don't believe that Brian Kelly is the long-term answer at LSU. Yeah, I mean, look, the one thing I think about Kelly is I think he's probably a pretty good coach. Does the pressure at LSU get to him after a while? Maybe it does. But, the one thing that I think that Kelly's tenure at Notre Dame proves, because they almost never lost a game in which they were favored. Games against unranked teams, games in which they were favored, they're almost always winning all of those games. So, you got to be a pretty good coach not to get upset very much. Now, they weren't beating teams with better talent, and that was obviously, I think, the thing that caused Kelly to want to leave is he just knew there was a big talent deficit between Notre Dame and the very best teams in college football. He's clearly had some issue with the transfer portal, but some of that is also just his sort of abrasive personality of trying to explain some of this. He's not a warm and fuzzy guy necessarily, and that kind of gets him in trouble from time to time. But I would say his overall performance on the field has been more good than bad. Spencer Clark pointing out that Richard Seymour and Garrison Hurst are both on the College Football Hall of Fame ballot. That's great to see. Obviously, Richard Seymour recently went to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And, Garrison Hurst, I think was, and of course, maybe you'd say I would think this, but to me, he was the rightful winner of the 1992 Heisman Trophy. I feel like he got robbed, even more so than Marshall Faulk, who obviously is a great player. John Snook says, I'm finally in Georgia. When can we have a beer together? Hopefully very soon, John. We'll see if we can get everybody together here for something in the near future. John, that'd be a lot of fun. That would be a lot of fun. Dallas. By the way, good to see everybody. This is Dallas Schwartz, I'm assuming. A long time. He kind of checks in and out with us on the show. He's living out there in the West. He says, SC is going to stop a mud hole in LSU. Fight on. So nice to see Dallas checking in, our kind of resident USC fan, which we haven't seen a ton of him, I don't think, lately. But good to see him checking in here today. Sounds like Nature Gator got a good health update. Nature, I'm glad to hear that. I hope keep us updated on that. I hope that continues to go well for you. Randy Payne checking in from Tifton, Georgia. You love that from Randy. Lance D says that Chipper's from DeLand, where Stetson is located. But he went to the Bowl School, which is in Jacksonville, right? Isn't DeLand closer to Orlando? Am I wrong about this? Maybe I'm wrong about that. Yeah, so Nature Gator will continue to send prayers out in your direction, and we mean that sincerely. Right, William Camacho says he's a beach connoisseur. I do like the beach as well, William. I like as much of the beach today as I can get. Lucy Bowers-Boykin, it's good to see you here today. So William Camacho says DeLand is in the Daytona Beach area. So maybe I had it all wrong to begin with. And Eric Ray says the tie that Chipper had to Stetson was that his dad coached at Stetson. Well, there you go. But when you get a chance, to hear Chipper these days talking about hitting and talking about baseball, man, what a great interview on the sport he is. Just a guy that, obviously dedicated his life to baseball and loves it. So much fun to hear. Anytime you get a chance to hear him talk, that's great. Timothy Wilson says, go Diamond Dawgs. You love that. Timothy, glad to have you with us today and supporting them. Miriam Corbin predicts that much like Stetson Bennett before him, that Carson Beck is about to be the next Georgia quarterback that lives in Alabama's nightmares, which is a lot of fun. All right, we're going to do a couple more comments. We're going to get out of here for today. Johnny says that Bowles High School recruited Chipper from DeLand. That's still kind of a long way to drive for high school, I guess, but maybe that's just what you do. Nature Gator pointing out that Chipper is a Gators fan. That is true. Nobody's perfect, I guess, in life, but Chipper is a Gators fan. That is true. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says, I've got some family who live near DeLand, drove past Stetson, very pretty campus. Yeah, I've always heard good things about it. I mean, I'm sure anytime you get a chance to go down to one of those like Florida schools for school, I'm guessing that's a pretty easy sale to a lot of people. For sure that's the case. There used to be that one, some of y'all know what I'm talking about, that one community college in Panama City. What was that called? They used to also host like a lot of tournaments and stuff when we were in high school for various things. Florida Gulf Coast that's Dunk City. That's down a little bit farther south, I think. There, this was like just a regular junior college. Kaylee Mansell popped in to ask about Florida Gulf Coast, which is Dunk City, and that's like Florida Gulf Coast is like right there on the beach. Their campus is on the beach. There's no telling how much they must have an easy sell there on that. But there's also like this it's literally like a community college right there in Panama City. I used to know. We used to be down there a good bit and think, gosh, people must love going there. Must be a lot of fun. So Johnny says that Bowles is a boarding school. So I guess that makes more sense on that. Let us see what else. Anything else before we go here today? Back on Facebook for a moment. Good stuff as always. Philip Jordan Wells says the Chipper probably would have been a Florida man if not for stick ball, as he calls it. Yeah, I don't know. We're big fans of Chipper around here. Florida fan or not, we're a big fan. Tennille Calvino says, I think it's coastal community part of the FSU network. Yeah, it's something like that, right? Maybe it's Gulf Coast Community College or something like that. It just seems like one of those places where like school is like 9th on the list of things going on, which I'm sure for a lot of people is a lot of fun. Probably the case. Miriam Corbin, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Johnny Prescott celebrates Chipper the Met Killer. You love that. Brian Jackson, thank you for the kind words. Really appreciate that, Brian. That's really nice of you. Really appreciate that indeed. How about back on DawgNation.com one more time there as well? DT says, my high school best friend was a pitcher at Stetson. I played catcher for him. His control was such that I never moved my mitt on his pitches. He hit it right where I set up. That's great to hear. Randy Hall says, how's your son's baseball team doing? They're having a great time. Had a nice weekend. Won a couple of games. That was a lot of fun. Just the stuff that he and I, have been able to do, through his baseball experience. And this is not like, we're not like, I'm not like crazy sports dad. You know what I'm saying? I'm not, pushing him to be whatever. We're just having a good time with it. But I tell you, it's just some of the best stuff you're ever going to do. And I mentioned yesterday that at some point in time, we'll talk more about this, we have a very weird summer coming up. He has a baseball event near the end of the summer that's sort of a one-time thing that is going to cause me to have to be away from work for a little while in a way that I typically would not take off. This is just one of those things that the people here have been kind enough to allow me to go do. So this is sort of outside the boundaries of sort of a normal vacation, just sort of a one-time deal that we're getting a chance to do. So yeah, that's kind of the story on that. We'll tell you more about that here coming up. Terry from Texas says the DawgNation Hotel for the Texas game is an awesome location, walking distance to the stadium. You can't do better than that in Austin this year. Well, Terry, that's great to hear. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Yeah, I can't wait. It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful time. Cannot wait for that. All right, anything else before we go? Lance D says that DeLand actually has a fairly nice downtown area, which is nice to hear. Good stuff. By the way, our buddy Nature Gator going back and forth with our buddy Randy. That's fun. Bill Shirley says he loved watching Jon Smoltz play. Yes, Smoltz, one of my all-time favorites. No doubt about that. One of the best to ever do it. Okay, we're going to go for now. Appreciate you all being with us. Always a fun conversation. We'll keep doing it again tomorrow there as well. So y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. Hot weather right now. How about getting that AC unit tuned up to factory fresh specs? RS Andrews got you covered on all of that. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. And hope you all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.